Let's just go ahead and get started, if that's okay. I am very excited for this session. The focus of this session is writing, and it's titled Multiple Steps, One Task. Excuse me. So I think sometimes when we think about writing, we think we're just writing, but there's a lot of behind-the-scenes steps that go into that writing process. And you don't need to raise your hand to tell me if your kiddo has some difficulty with writing. But during this session, I really want you to think about maybe what area exactly in the writing process that your child or a child that you co-teach or work with, really think about where exactly their challenge is, rather than just thinking writing. Try to think exactly what point it is that is difficult, and then we can talk about it afterwards. But a topic of discussion that's brought up a lot is this concept of writing, and more specifically, how do I get my child to write better? I've been asked this a lot, so that's why I really wanted to talk about it today. And it wasn't until I spoke with a professional that I've worked with in the past that I got this aha moment. Yes, that makes sense. Why did I think about that? So that's what I'm going to share with you today. A very common writing task or assignment is write blank sentences about blank. Have we all heard that or seen that? Write 5 sentences on the Great Depression, or 4 sentences on World War II. Have we all seen that format somewhere? For some of us, that's quite simple. Some individuals can do that well, and they might have their sentences made up really quickly, but some, it might not come as quickly. So I want to talk through these steps. So the very first thing, when asked to write about a topic that we may think is simple but is not, is going all the way back to that foundation of letter sound recognition. Okay? Some individuals have to recall, before they even start writing, they have to recall the letter sound portion, right? A says ah, B says but, whatever. They have to go back to phonemic awareness. They have to go back to that basic law. And some kiddos maybe don't have that mastered, or it's a challenge. And sometimes that's the very first part that gets them hung up on their writing. Okay? And then that would hinder the entire writing process when they're stuck on that first part. Does anybody have questions about that first part? Does that make sense when I say the letter sound recognition?
Can you give an example?
So if the direction is to write 5 sentences on blank, and before they can even start writing the sentence, they might be back at the beginning thinking how to spell the. Because the sound starts with the sound, which is TH, and some kiddos might not have that beginning, that very first part, to even start to spell the, which could be the very first word in their sentence. Good question.
Can I just say that sometimes I've had parents tell me they were just so tired by the time we got to this, I just had them tell me what they wanted to say and I wrote it, and I think that's fine.
Yes.
I just want to say that sometimes verbally telling a story,
Yes.
5 sentences about the subject to mom and letting mom write it down, I think that's just fine, because they weren't able at that point in their life to put it all in the paper and do it all. But if they can say what they want to say,
Yes.
That's the assignment.
Yes, scribing is a good, I think it can be a good accommodation when necessary. Absolutely. So there's that first part, that very first letter sound recognition, that can sometimes take up a lot of brain power too for some kiddos. Okay? Then we move into the second part, okay? The individual uses that letter sound recognition to form the word. So like if you go back to the, okay, I have to recognize, and the's not really a good example because the cannot really be sounded out, kind of be coded, but that's the one I came up with off the top of my head. but they have to put the sounds into the words to form the words in order to form the sentence. Okay, so that's step 2. Another thing that's happening in this step is that they are being asked, they are recalling the knowledge to put those words into a structured sentence as well. Okay, so they're not just writing these words, right? They have to have these words to make a cohesive sentence, a sentence that makes sense. So we have the first step, which is the letter sound recognition. That might come automatic to some people, it might come really quick, but it might not for some. Now we're taking that letter sound recognition and putting it into a word, and each word's being utilized to make the sentence. Okay, are there any questions on that step? Okay. Then there's a third step. Okay. The student is formulating the sentences, or combining the sentences to create the writing piece, right? In this step, the student is also using the skill of transferring their thoughts to paper, and specifically creating the sentence that's also using correct and proper sentence structure and syntax. All right. So now you're forming your sentences. You're also being asked to recall appropriate sentence structure. And some kiddos, that's really difficult. If some of you maybe have a kiddo and you went back and reread their writing work, maybe they don't have correct word order, maybe they don't have the correct tense of words, or their subject and verb don't agree. Maybe they have a fragment versus a sentence, okay? So that's also happening within that step, but they're also being asked to write the sentence. Does that make sense? Hopefully? Okay, good. After all of that, okay, one of the most important parts is that students are being asked to hold on to that very first piece of information in the brain, which was write blank sentences about blank. So as they're going through all these steps of creating the words, to create the sentence, to create the writing piece, they're also being asked to hold on to the very first direction, which was what is driving their whole writing piece. And some kiddos lose that, so sometimes we might see sentences that maybe don't go along with what they're writing, or maybe they're writing and then I forgot what I was supposed to be writing about. You might see that. This also has to do with their working memory, right? It can be an area of weakness for some students. Individuals that do not necessarily have a strong working memory, they might lose that very first piece at the beginning, which drive their overall writing performance and then the final product, right? They may forget what exactly they're supposed to be writing, exactly what they're supposed to be writing about. You were supposed to be writing about the Great Depression, but they might add in some extra parts that really aren't relevant to the topic. Maybe they forgot that first piece, which was writing about the Great Depression. And then they kind of lose parts there into their writing. Before we move on, did those steps make sense? So just to kind of recap, again, it might come quickly for some students as others, but again, you're being asked to recall that letter sound recognition. That's the very first step. Then you're using that to create words, the words to create the sentences. The sentences have to be used to create a writing piece that flows together, that makes sense. And then within all those steps, you have the parts of recalling appropriate sentence structure. Does this make sense? Do I have appropriate subject verb agreement? Do I have punctuation, capitalization? So what I really want you to take away from that is that there are these steps. Even though you're just being asked to write sentences about a topic, there's all these little pieces that go into that. And if your child is maybe having difficulty writing, maybe there's a piece within there, or maybe two, it's just hard. But they're just maybe not getting, and that's what's affecting the entire writing process. Before we go on, does anybody have examples, or do they want to talk about any of that? Do you see that with any of your kiddos?
That's my son Preston. He has really good memory. You tell him what to write about, he will remember that. But just like the pain of actually figuring out how to spell a word, and he'll have the words, but spelling them in order. Even if he has all the words for the sentence, getting them in order
Sure.
is a lot of work.
The order of the words to create the sentence. Right.
Yeah.
So scribing is great in appropriate situations. Sometimes with that too, if you have him maybe say the sentence, and again, it would be more work for a co-teacher, but taking those words, writing them on a note card or anything that you have, maybe a blank slate, you have those and jumble them around and have him pull them to form the sentence. That's an exercise you could do to help with that word order. I think it's a really good example. Thank you for sharing that. Mrs. Watson?
I had some kids last year that they were thinking so fast, they couldn't write fast enough. So they would end up skipping words in their sentences, like some of the prepositions. Like the small words are important. They would skip major things down.
Sure, they will miss something.
I had them I'd read it and I'd see what's wrong, and I'd have them just read it out loud to me. And they'd start reading it, and they'd get to that, and I'd say, wait. They would say the word, but it wasn't there.
Sure.
I'd say, read the words that are there, and then they'd find it, and they'd self-correct. But they had to slow down, to figure that out.
I think having them go back and read it, that's a great strategy. And then, right, sometimes our brains, they read what we know we were trying to write.
Yeah.
So I think that's really good that you have them, wait a minute, you are missing a word here. And I think too, for writers that maybe get too fast in their thinking, having them do that where they read it aloud, or even having them brainstorm aloud first before beginning writing. Sometimes that helps individuals because they really have to think about what they're telling you before they start to write on the paper. But going back and rereading is a great strategy, so they can see kind of what they forgot. Does anybody else have any examples they want to?
This might be jumping ahead, but related to this is I find this helps my kids find spelling errors. So and often you're right, they'll just read the word the way it's supposed to be. But then I'll say, let me try it. So I'll say, so his let me see if I can give an example. So his manganatachan or something. I'll actually say exactly what the word says. They'll think it's hilarious. Because it's just random words coming out of my head. But then they'll be like, oh yeah, that's right. So you can kind of make it into something fun.
Absolutely. And that probably helps the atmosphere, right, as you're learning.
Yeah.
I'm sure that helps kind of makes it enjoyable and fun. But absolutely reading back exactly what they read, and then they get to hear it. That's a good strategy. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? No. Okay. So while we assign this common task, we must remember again that not all individuals have the steps mastered, and finding the step maybe that's not mastered or that's a challenge. I think that's the first part we kind of have to work on as we're working on the writing process, right? So trying to pick out, well, where you're having some difficulties writing, but where in that process is the issue? Is it maybe the letter sound recognition in that first step, or maybe it's the creating complete sentences to create the entire writing piece? So I think finding that step, that's the first part, and kind of identifying how to maybe help your child with their writing process. A side note, I don't know if older students can use text to speech to text. That's I think another topic of conversation, but it does work for some individuals, and it depends on the policy, right, that can be that's established. But what can we specifically do for some writing focused tasks? Providing an outline, and that outline can be simplified. or that outline can be very in-depth. So finding an outline maybe that works for the individual. Creating a web where the student writes out their ideas. So something that I remember from when I was in school is specifically for writing class, our teacher would have us give us a topic. She would give us a web like this or whatever, and you were only graded on a few parts. You had to get your ideas that went with the topic that was given, and if not all of your topics specifically went with the topic that's given, you couldn't do it. It didn't count, I guess, because you had to specifically get the ideas down first. Then after you got each idea down that went with the writing topic given, then you give bullet points for each part, okay? So sometimes just needing a way to visualize the information, sometimes getting the information out before they even start writing onto a lined piece of paper, sometimes that's what a kiddo might need. Another suggestion is maybe brainstorming thoughts aloud. Again, before even writing anything, just sit down and ask them, what do you want to write about? This is the topic. What do we want to write about? Listen to what they have to say, and then maybe if that one doesn't really go with the overall topic, or maybe that one does, can we expand on that a little bit? So sometimes for learners that maybe get anxious about writing, don't have them start writing right off the bat. Maybe just do a conversation aloud about what they're writing about. You could even do a brainstorming group activity. If you sit at a table, in a circle, what are you going to write about for this topic? So then they're talking about the ideas aloud. Then maybe they go to their seat, take the ideas, start writing, or maybe writing a few sentences to start. That's an idea. One that I found works pretty well with some students is providing directions that can be followed chronologically or in order. So this would be an example. Create an opening sentence. Okay, the child focuses on that one step. If they did it, great, check. If not, help them get to that point. 2, expand with 2 sentences. So now the child knows exactly I need to write 2 sentences only, okay? Check in, so check in with your teacher. They okay what you have written. Okay, write next sentence. Check in. Write next sentence. Write concluding sentence. So some very simple directions that you're giving them to follow, and it's chronological, so they are following these steps. And I know that I cannot move on until I complete this step. Sometimes that works well with students. Do many of you have a kiddo or work with a student where you just give them a piece of paper to go write, and they kind of just start writing all kinds of stuff, and maybe it doesn't make sense, or maybe there's sentences that are just don't belong to the topic? Have any of you seen that with your learners? Yes? No? Okay, yes? So, okay, thank you. So some students, you give them a paper and tell them to just go write about the topic. There's not enough structure there. They don't know. They need a direction. They need steps to follow. So sometimes putting those steps in chronological order help. Again, also being mindful of that working memory piece. That working memory piece is so fascinating to me. How we process and use information, how we recall that information that's been given to us, how long we're able to hold on to that piece of information, okay? So you think about that student that's given the very first direction, write blank sentences about blank, and then all the students start working on their assignment, but one kiddo might be like only holding on to that piece, and then they don't know how to start. Or they start writing, and then by the time they get to the end, they're like, wait a minute, what was I supposed to be writing about? I don't remember, okay? So this concept of working memory comes into play as well. and I have an idea or an example here, but the teacher says, unpack your book bag, place your lunch on the table, and line up. Today's lunch is pizza and salad. What were the directions in there? Line up, unpack your book bag. That was the first step, right? It's interesting that line up was the one. Did I use that?
Later.
Huh? Put your lunch on the table, right? So a lot of pieces of information here, a lot of steps to follow, and this is common. We do this, you know. We give these directions as students are walking in, but there's a lot of information here. Some individuals can follow those fine and do all of those, but some students are focusing on that one direction, which was unpack your book bag, right? And then they cannot remember the rest. That has to do with your working memory. Okay. You may notice that one student starts unpacking their book bag, continues to maybe work at their desk or play at their desk. It's because they only remembered the unpack your book bag part and not the rest. All students and learners grasp and hold on to information differently. So just understanding that, just recognizing that. Some students might need things repeated. So if you see a student is struggling or having some difficulty with the writing process, you know, which step are you on? Which part are you at? Or which part is causing the most challenge for you? And how can I help? And trying to find that exact step to work on, right? So I'm going to finish a little early, sorry. I hope we can maybe do a question and answer, but if not, that's okay too. But concluding with the direction from the very beginning, okay? So writing however many sentences on a given topic. We can try to recognize that what may seem like a simple direction, that's a simple task for some of us. It's not always simple for someone else. And what one student's brain is able to process through, another's may not. That processing time, that working memory, that's all different for all of us. Okay? And I hope that made sense in terms of the writing process. Does anybody have questions about those steps that we went over? I am kind of trying to read your faces. Like, does this make sense? Does it not make sense?
Is there a way to help them improve their working
Yes. Working memory, so it's how we take in the information, use it, and then output, whatever we generate out. I would say to work on working memory is like repetition. And here's an example maybe we can relate to. You have a recipe that you follow and you make, and you don't know it, and you don't really have it memorized, so you keep pulling it out every time you make it. And then after a while, after you're doing it, hopefully it commits to memory, and then eventually you might not need that recipe. I know I need 2 cups, got my 2 cups of flour, I know I need a tablespoon of sugar, I got that. So to work on working memory, it would be to repeat or do repetition of things, and that.
Yeah, I just think that if you give them a list of 3 or 4 tasks to be done,
Okay.
it's first time. It's like he doesn't even remember that even work, with the others.
Sure.
So would I write them down?
Yes. If someone,
Really good?
if someone's working on working memory, I'd absolutely do like a list format, or numbers or bullet points. Do the first one before you can move on. If you can incorporate like a self-check, did you do that? You check it off. If you can incorporate something like that, that usually works well. But repetition. This might sound silly to some. This is what we did with the student in our previous school year. Working memory was very low, and we greatly gained memory every morning for like 15 minutes. We did it for the whole school year, and eventually we were seeing improvements in that working memory because they're being asked to recall where specific pieces are. But it does take time. Working memory does take time. But yes, I really like your question there about, do I write it down, write it in this? Absolutely. I would start. And then maybe what you could do is you can maybe pull out a step. And maybe you pull off if that student is doing really well, they're getting it, maybe you pull off the last step. Hey, do you remember what the last step is? And then hopefully with time, they'll be able to recall that step. If they can't recall it, then maybe put it back on to whatever it is you're doing. Really great question. Really great question. Did that make sense?
I was just going to give.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to give an example. Like, I have trouble when I'm copying work, knowing how many words to have. Like, some people can look at a whole sentence and write down the sentence. I can't do that. And so I have to look at one word, write it down, then look at another word and write it down. If you want to try and improve that, you can progressively overload your brain by doing 2 words this time.
Sure.
Then doing 3 words the next time, then doing 4 words. So that would be an exercise from my personal experience, how to increase your working memory.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Absolutely, because it does also depend on the individual, right? What's going to stick for them, what's going to help them work on that piece. Thank you. Yes, Mrs. Swan.
I also have an example. My grandson has autism, so my daughter has worked with him. His working memory, was needed a lot of work. And she would use the words like first and then.
Yes.
First, put your shirt on, then put your pants on. He'd walk around with the shirt on and just underwear. I mean, he would forget to put his pants on. So they just started doing first, then.
Yes.
First, then. And it started clicking.
First
You know,
charts are typically very
First do
successful.
this, then do that. And then he's 9 now, and they have started making a list for him to check out.
Yes,
And he is
wonderful.
really responding well to that.
He checks it off on his own. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's a slow process
It is. Yeah.
to build that memory and to recognize that that's something you have to do. You have to remember things.
Yes. And first then charts are great because yes, in some, I'll just say some individuals you might start with a picture versus starting with words, depending on the age group or the severity level. But right, first shirt, then pants. I see your shirt's on, you complete the first task, what were you supposed to do next? And then repeat, first shirt, then pants. That repetition I think is not thing. That repetition is key. Thank you for that. Yes. Anybody else? Anybody else?
Well, I was just going to say with the IEW that they use here for the grammar school, the kids are very used to these keyword outlines.
Yes.
So, they typically use it for something that's already written, and so making them do any for their own writing is actually sometimes more of a challenge than you would think it would be because it's just a different context. But just 3 words or symbols for each sentence, that can be a good place to start. And it can be, like you were saying, just symbols. It doesn't need to be full words.
Yes. Identifying the 3 words. Yes. I think that's also a good spot to start. Right? You want to write a sentence. This is if you do not have the IEW, right, for example, but what 3 words you want to start with, or what is a focal point that you want to focus on before you even start writing. But the IEW does do that really well. Thank you.
I have a student who's very good at grammar and speaks very well with grammar, but they can't write as well. Is that just a disconnect between what he thinks versus what he can? I don't know, just like trying to come out of his hand.
Sure. So it could be, I also think that's a really good part where the thought to paper is the challenge. And maybe to help work on that, encourage journal writing or just encourage free writing. Just get your thoughts, give the student maybe a topic to write about, a simple topic that they can write about. Not all kids can write about the Great Depression, right, or something like that, but give them a topic they can write about and start writing about just that. Hey, just give me 2 or 3 sentences about this topic. And eventually, the goal, that eventually they will pull those thoughts out and start writing it. But if you're doing like a writing piece and that's the challenge, you might need to go sentence per sentence with them. Maybe have them tell you what they want to write. You repeat back exactly how they said it, and then work on that sentence, the very first sentence that they're being asked to write. Mrs. Bean did make a good comment about scribing. I don't want to speak on behalf of scribing because I know it's allowed. Like some classrooms allow that, some do not. So I'm not going to speak on behalf of that. That would be a conversation with your teacher, probably. But scribing is also very helpful to start with that first process of thought to paper. And again, repetition. Even though there's maybe a disconnect or there's a challenge, still have them try to write. And hey, what are we missing? Read back exactly what they read. Are you missing? Is it misspelled, or are you missing a word in there? Really sit down and dissect the sentence that they gave you. Does that make sense? Does it?
No, it does.
Okay.
I like the idea of just having to rewrite more. I do think that would be
I don't think they enjoy it.
It's a huge challenge. Like I'm going back to school myself, and I was trying to narrow down what I wanted to write my paper on. And I just rewrote for 30 minutes, and then what I thought I wanted to write my paper on, I didn't have much info for it, but all this other stuff. But it totally changed the shift of the paper I was writing just by spending 30 minutes rewriting.
Because then you can go back and edit. You can go back and add or take away.
Right.
But free writing, you usually get out your initial thoughts.
Right.
Free writing. And I should add that this was like the process of writing, but two, sometimes writing is not the preferred subject, right? Writing is usually for most not the fun task. So when you encourage journaling or just writing for enjoyment, like you just said, that kind of kickstarts the act of writing, the physical act of writing. Okay, you're giving me a topic that I like to write about. Let me just pull my thoughts, wherever they are, write them out. Eventually, again, the goal is that they will enjoy writing and they will start writing complete sentences. They'll start writing sentences that make sense. I hope that helps.
My kids are so little, but to prompt writing
Yes.
and or excitement, a little bit to pick up the pencil, like picking out letting them pick out the character notebook if they want to do like Pokemon, whatever they're doing, and then they want that notebook specifically because it's special to them. Picking out pens, whether they're colorful or not, letting them pick those things out, and then they feel it's more personalized for them. And the other thing we kind of picked up was like letters. I know snail mail is not as popular anymore, but like writing letters to your grandparents because they love to get them in the mail, and then receiving it is more exciting, than just seeing your parents with those in the mail first. So, but that seems to really help so far cultivate at least a little bit for us. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Another thing I just thought of, we've done this with some kiddos in the past, but giving them a picture to write about. So sometimes if they maybe are still having difficulty pulling those sentences, you give them a topic, but it's like I have the sentences, but I can't get it, or what should I write? If you give them a picture, and then they just have to write based off of the picture. What do you see, or what do you think is happening in this picture? And then giving them prompts that go with that picture, that sometimes can help kind of begin that writing skill. Anybody else? Or do you guys have any questions or anything? Again, I think the key is really thinking about if you have a challenge in writing, if you have a student with a challenge in writing, thinking about the exact part that is causing the challenge. Instead of just saying, so-and-so is having difficulty writing, or writing so broad, just really trying to narrow it down to which part, and then going from there. Trying to work on and improve that part. And then hopefully the writing process will follow. So that is all I had. This is all I had, so thank you guys. And thank you for the input.
Thank you.